Today we are talking about sleep, and on Tip Tuesday we know that a lot of us could do with some tips for getting a good night's sleep. And whether that is issues with falling asleep or staying asleep, the majority of adults are not getting enough sleep for health benefits. And so for most adults, that's somewhere in the 7 to 9 hour range. And we know that most people are either not getting enough of that good quality sleep in that time frame each night, or they are sleeping for that amount of time, but it's not a restful sleep. It's not a good quality sleep. And so I wanted to give you a few of my top tips for sleep, because we know that sleep is so important in our body's daily function. The different sleep stages in our sleep cycle can be incredibly important. All of them are necessary. We often think of deep sleep as being sort of the pillar of a good night's sleep, but we do need light sleep. We do need REM sleep, because different things happen in our body in the repair process during each of those times of sleep. And we also know that deep sleep is incredibly reparative for the body, for our physical body, for tissue repair, for muscle growth. So we do want to be getting those deep sleep hours as well. So when we sleep, we go through essentially 90-minute sleep cycles. And during that 90 minutes, we fluctuate between light sleep to deep sleep to REM sleep. Light sleep is where our brains are working, they're organizing things, all of the thought processes, it's like filing things away. It's doing that cleanup process at the end of each day. So moving things into long-term storage of memory, short-term storage of memory, or saying we're done with that. And then deep sleep is where our body moves into that deep physical repair. Growth hormone is released during this time. This is where we get that physical repair. This is where we really get that deep relaxation response. And then REM sleep is when we're dreaming. And dreaming is really important as well, because what happens when we're dreaming is, again, this sort of categorization and organization of different thoughts and putting them all into place, which is why sometimes we can have dreams where things feel very mismatched. It's like a situation from somewhere in a different home with a different person, and it all seems really mumble jumbled. But really what we know is that it's very beneficial. Now, those 90-minute sleep cycles, the ratio of deep sleep is greater during those first cycles in the night, which means that we want to try to get to sleep before midnight, ideally, but the hours before midnight are when we're going to have the greatest amount of deep sleep. And as we move into the early morning and into the morning, perhaps when our alarm goes off, that ratio of deep sleep to REM sleep changes. So in a 90-minute sleep cycle earlier in the morning, we're going to have less deep sleep and more REM sleep, which is often why we'll get woken up out of the dream when our alarm clock goes off, or when we wake up first thing in the morning, we can remember our dreams more vividly because we are likely coming out of REM sleep. Now, all of that to say, that's why sleep is important. The other thing that our overall sleep process does is it helps to act as essentially like an irrigation system for our brain. So all of the millions of thoughts that we have every day, all of the actions, all of the processes of like telling from our brain down to our organs or to our muscles to go and do things, learning, remembering, all of these processes, they're chemical reactions in our brain, and they create byproduct. Just like when we work out really hard and we're sore the next day because of a lactic acid buildup, that lactic acid is a byproduct. So we have byproduct that builds up in our brain. And when we sleep, it washes it away. So it clears a slate for a new day to begin. if we're not getting adequate sleep, that byproduct isn't being swept away or cleared away, and as a result, that can lead to cognitive dysfunction, it can lead to brain fog, it can lead to difficulty concentrating, difficulty with physical performance. So there's lots of things that can happen when we don't get enough sleep, and any new parents out there can probably recognize and attest to that experience when you go for days and weeks and months and even years not getting adequate sleep. So what do we do about it? How do we maximize our sleep? I want to give you 4 tips that are going to be beneficial in supporting healthy sleep cycles. The first is actually what you do first thing in the morning, and this is exposure to light. So when we get outside within an hour of waking, we have preferably bright sunlight on our eyes, no glasses, not through a window, but direct sunlight. We have photoreceptors in our retinas. And when the sunlight hits our eyes, what it does is it triggers a response for about 14 hours later as a signal to our brains that it will be time to start to get ready for bed. And as a result, about 14 hours later, melatonin starts to be released. And melatonin is a big instigator in our sleep cycle. I'll talk about melatonin a little bit more in a moment. So that's one of the best things that you can do, is get out first thing in the morning within an hour of waking for at least 10 minutes of direct light. I recognize right now it's a bit hit or miss, but do what you can, or sit by a bright lamp. That is a reasonable substitute, but nowhere near as good as outdoor light exposure. Linking into that, what can be really helpful is getting exposure again on our eyes at sort of the last sun of the day. So when the sun is in that low place, again, what it does is it signals to our brains that it's going to be time for sleep shortly, within about 4 to 5 hours. And it actually provides a protective mechanism against increased light exposure later on in the evening. So if you have bright lights on in your home, if you're being exposed to screens, which we'll talk about in a second, it can act as a bit of an armor or a barrier to the impacts of that. Now, so that's one of the best things that you can do, and it's really remarkable when people start doing this, they're going out first thing in the morning, the impact that they notice on their sleep in the evening. And I know it seems crazy because it's so far apart in your day, but really it can make a huge difference. The other thing is looking at the basics of sleep hygiene, and I know these sound basic, I know these sound simple, you've probably heard these over and over and over again, and most people don't do them. So looking at sleep hygiene is incredibly important. Now, here are a few things that we want to be mindful of when it comes to sleep hygiene. One is dimming the lights in the evening. So just like bright light exposure in the morning helps to set that timer later for melatonin, it also helps to release cortisol, which is the hormone in our body that gets us up and going in the day. Melatonin, when darkness hits our eyes, is released from our pineal gland in our brains. And melatonin is the signaler, if you will, to promote the sleep cascade. So melatonin doesn't make us sleepy or make us sleep, but what it does is it puts a number of different processes into play to say, okay, it's time to get ready for bed. It's kind of like at a track race, the person who sets the gun off to say go. They don't then run the race, but they stay there and make sure that the athletes run the race. So it's the same with melatonin. Melatonin builds up in our bodies and makes sure that everything else in our bodies that are responsible for supporting a healthy sleep get going and get us tired. Okay, so melatonin will only be released if we've made these connections with light. So first thing in the morning, and then again, darkness later on. So how do we have darkness? Obviously, we're not walking around in the dark from 6 p.m. onwards. So what can we do? We can decrease overhead light exposure. That makes a huge difference. So decreasing that overhead light exposure and using softer, more ambient light. So floor lamps, table lamps. These can be really beneficial. Of course, decreasing blue light or screens will be really helpful if you are wearing blue light blockers for your glasses, or if you just turn your screens off altogether. Screen time does so many things that can interfere with sleep. One is definitely the blue light, which is stimulating to our brains. But number two, what it does is whatever we're doing on our screens, whether it's scrolling social media, reading the news, playing video games, watching a movie, it's stimulating. And so when we get stimulated, that turns our brain on, that gets neurotransmitters going that are exciting, and it makes it harder for us to unwind, to go to bed later. So we want to decrease screen time. We want to do that for about an hour before bed, more if you can. And that's really, it links into point number 3, which is let's scrap the devices late in the evening. It makes such a difference. There were alarm clocks before the iPhone was invented, and those alarm clocks are still so great now and provide such a great benefit, meaning you don't have to have your phone in your room. Okay, so let's try to keep the phone out of the bedroom, even putting your phone on do not disturb so that you decide when you see your notifications in the morning, you're not starting off with a stressful situation. That can all be really helpful. So that's like point 2 and 3 together is screens. Going back to sleep hygiene, we want to make sure that we're sleeping in a really dark room and that it's a cool room. So when our body temperature drops, as it does when we sleep, if we can match that with the environment around us, it helps us move into that deep sleep state even sooner. Okay. Other things related to sleep hygiene, especially if you're someone who wakes up in the middle of the night. Sometimes you can wake up with that panic at around 2 a.m. That's often related to our stress response and an abnormal cortisol curve. But we want to repeat these actions. So we want to get up out of bed if we can't fall asleep within 10 minutes. And same when you're going to sleep in the evening. If you can't fall asleep within about 10 minutes, you want to get up and go and do something quiet, whether that's journaling, reading a book, listening to a guided meditation or yoga nidra, things that can help to down-regulate your nervous system. So it doesn't mean getting up and scrolling your phone or looking at the news or listening to a really exciting podcast. No, it means keeping that energy level really low. And if you wake up around 2 a.m. or whenever it is in the morning, if you can't fall back asleep within about 10 minutes or so, then it's time to get up and repeat those steps. Okay. Being mindful so that we're not waking up in the middle of the night to go pee. Try to limit fluid intake for about 2 hours before bed. Everyone's a little bit different, but that's definitely something that we want to consider. The fourth is looking at magnesium as an important supplement for supporting our sleep rhythm. If you're not taking magnesium, it could be something to consider. Magnesium is generally safe for the majority of people. And typically we want to look at something like magnesium glycinate or bisglycinate, which is going to give you that relaxing feeling without making you go to the bathroom. So other types of magnesium like magnesium citrate can cause loose bowels. So definitely that's not something that we want interfering with our sleep. So if you have questions about magnesium as a supplement, please reach out. I would be happy to help. But that can be very supportive in terms of those steps within the body for supporting sleep. Also in terms of muscle relaxation. So if you're someone who experiences something like restless leg or muscle twitching through the night that can be really distracting and challenging to fall asleep with, magnesium can be incredibly beneficial with that. All right, so those are my 4 top tips for helping us with sleep. So it's light exposure first thing in the morning and then again at last sun. Remembering our sleep hygiene, so dark bedroom. Bed is associated with sleep. It's not associated with being on your phone, watching shows, even like things like journaling, reading. For some people that's too much. We want bed to be associated with sleep. We want to make sure we're not using screens for at least an hour before bed. A real recommendation of get a real alarm clock. I love the Philips Wake Up Light. They have lots of different models that range significantly in price. I have the base model. I think it was like $70, and I love it. It's a slow light that comes on to wake you up. It's not a loud that, you know, the alarm clock I had as a child. So definitely we've come a long way. And then looking at magnesium as a potential supplement and support for sleep. So if you have questions, reach out. If you have other tips that have helped you with a good night's sleep, please let us know in the comments. I'd love to hear, and we will talk to you soon.